Welcome to the Raise. I'm your host Jade, and I'm delighted to be here today with Danae, who's the co-founder of Yoxly. Yoxly offers at-home STI testing kits, stigma-free education, and has an engaged social media following of over 1 million people who tune in to get sexual self-care tips from Danae and her team. So today we'll be talking about the round they've just closed, to learn from the team's experiences. So Danae, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Jade. Thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, no, I mean it's great to have you, and we've done some work together in the past, so it's always nice to have somebody that I know personally here as well.
Yeah.
Um, but as well as I know you, it would be great if you could tell everybody that's listening a bit about your background and why you started Yoxley.
Sure. So I'm Danae. I am a medical doctor with a background in public health. I'm also a member of the British Association for Sexual Health and HIV. You can probably tell by my accent, I'm not from the US, or excuse me, I'm not from the UK. I'm originally, yeah, I know, right? I'm originally from the US, and then I came to Oxford in 2015. Didn't intend to stay, but all of a sudden I became involved in med tech, met my partner, and so Oxford over the last few years has become home. Yoxley is actually the second med tech venture that I have co-founded, having to do with remote diagnostics and looking at big data and predictive health algorithms. And I suppose the idea for Yoxley had kind of been percolating in my brain for over a decade. I'm going to date myself now. Back in 2007, 2008, when I was doing my my master's in Philadelphia. Um, I wrote my thesis on the health disparities and resiliencies that existed within Philadelphia's transgender community. And I noticed that here was a group of people that was really good at talking openly about what their sexual health needs were, because oftentimes their needs weren't being met by conventional medical practice, right? Like they were educating their providers. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, this is really interesting. Everybody should be taking a page out of this book. Fast forward a few more years, I was living and working in different parts of, Europe, the Americas, Africa, and everywhere I went, I saw sexual healthcare was really fragmented. Nowhere seemed to do it particularly well, and it was still kind of, I guess, entrenched with a lot of stigma and shame. And then a few years later, I am in Oxford and, part of this other med tech startup, and I'm working in the emergency department. And I was seeing lots of patients come through with late stage complications of undiagnosed and untreated STIs. And I was like,
Wow.
yeah. And I was like, well, this is weird because we live in England. Healthcare is technically free at the point of access. Like we're no longer in the States. I was like, what's going on? Why aren't people using the services?
Mm.
Yeah. And so I suppose for lack of a better word, I ended up getting frustrated because I saw that the quality of life for the patient was really suffering. And in terms of the healthcare system, they were spending hundreds of thousands of pounds managing late stage complications when actually a lot of it could have been avoided with better education and prompt access to testing and treatment. So instead of, I guess, I tried to channel that frustration into a productive kind of outcome. And so with my current co-founders, who happen to be my neighbors and my friends, Yoxley was born.
But it's really interesting that you say that because I find that a lot of founders either start a company because they've had the problem before or they've seen it done really badly. Um, and just interesting that you say because the healthcare system here in England is free, that there was that expectation it would be better. I feel like that happens quite often when people come over here and they think, oh, surely it should be better, but there's still those friction points.
Yeah, I mean, like the healthcare system here, I mean, it does so much good for so many people, but its resources are, it's stretched and, demand keeps going up and budgets keep going down. So people struggle to access services, for logistical issues and, but then there are also like societal issues that contribute to people maybe not accessing sexual healthcare or feeling like they know where to go, again, because of some of the stigma and shame that surround it. So I think it's a pretty complex issue, but yes, essentially it is when you see something wrong and instead of just complaining about it, you want to try and create a solution to the problem. Um, so yeah, but I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur, as a business person. Like it's not, I always saw myself very much as a clinician. So
Mm.
it's been quite a journey to, I guess, try and take some of those skills that I have developed over the course of a medical career and try and apply those to a business. And actually, there are a lot of transferable skills, which was a pleasant surprise.
I can imagine. It would actually be great to hear more about that journey and that transition from, Deny the doctor, the clinician to the founder. So how did you find that experience?
Painful. So Yoxly is a med tech company. So, I have some clinical knowledge, but there's so much more to the business than the science. There's actually, the business of business, which I was not prepared for in medical school. And so we were very lucky. So my co-founders and I applied to the Oxford Foundry program, which is the university's business accelerator program, and we were accepted onto that. And so that was really fantastic in helping to take us from, we have this idea, how do we take this idea and kind of turn it into a reality? And not just in terms of the business, but also us as entrepreneurs. Like, what are the things we need to be thinking about? How do we tackle certain challenges? I think as a woman, as a clinician, I spent so much of my life, proving that I was, studying in order to be able to do something, and then doing a certain number of cases, or, to show that you're capable of doing something. And then all of a sudden, you become an entrepreneur and you're just kind of figuring it out as you go, which is not how medicine, it's not typically how you're taught. So it was a shift in thinking there, and not getting stuck in the analysis paralysis where you kind of, you want
Mm,
everything is perfect before you move forward. You want to optimize everything. And actually, sometimes the most important thing to do is just to get out there and get started, and you will
yeah.
obviously in a safe way. Especially for med tech companies, there's certain standards you cannot compromise on, and nor should you. But like, you just need to get out there and get started to see what it is people like, what is it they don't like, because actually the bulk of your learning will happen after you kind of launched, not necessarily before.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that Yoxley has done incredibly well with is getting that information out there, because there are people that have all of these questions, and you and your team proactively try to answer those through the video content that you create. Um, and that really makes a difference to your community, because it's like a safe space to get those answers that otherwise just isn't really created for them.
100%. I mean, you should see my content when we first started. Like, being, again, a doctor, I was making content that I thought was really interesting. And I was like, oh, everyone would love this about disease statistics. And as it turned out, nobody did. Um, did not resonate with anyone, save like one other epidemiologist, um, which I appreciate. But yeah, I think our community really kind of underscored the fact that, sexual health is about more than just the absence of a disease. It really
Mm,
is a state of physical, psychological, and social well-being. And while lots of people had questions about the testing and some of the medical stuff, they had far more questions about other things that pertain to their sexual wellness, that they didn't know where to go to get reliable advice. And again,
mm,
sexual health is a human need, right? Like, it's something that it's a need we all have from the time we're young adults to, if we're lucky, the time we die. And so
mm,
the fact that, I think it is a shared experience, that, and the fact that there's not places people can go to talk about it freely or with confidence, just seems like a shame. So yes, we have experienced a lot of engagement, and it's been really rewarding, to see people from all over the world, talking about, what their lives have been like, some of the challenges that they faced, and some of the value that they gain from being able to have these types of conversations, albeit online, and through the anonymity of social media. So perhaps some of
mm.
those, like, those stigmas that kind of surround sexual health, it gives people a feeling of security to be able to connect with others, but without perhaps, revealing an identity.
Yeah, I mean that makes a huge difference. So it gives people that added layer of security. It feels more safe because there's nobody that can pinpoint it. This question has come from me, or I really wanted that answer. So no, I love the fact that Yoxley is doing that for people. And just to talk about the fundraise, it's a huge effort for any founder or any founding team to undergo fundraising, especially in this climate where the world has kind of financially been on fire for the past couple of years. So one of the things that we hear founders saying time and time again is, it's that struggle to get started. So, how did you and your co-founders like kickstart that process?
That's a good question. So I think before you go out to fundraise, I think there are a few things you should probably consider first. So when you have to have a clear idea for your business, right? So like what is it that you do? Why is it useful? Why is it different than anything or better than anything else that's currently out there? So
Mm,
having that information and being really clear about that internally will help you go a long way in the fundraise when you're asking people for money.
mm,
Um, I think the other thing you should probably consider is how much money you actually need, and then what are you going to do with it? Like, what can you achieve with the capital that you're going out to raise? What does success look like? I think that's also really important to think about before you go out and ask, because ultimately, depending on how you're raising, you may be giving away a portion of your company to raise that capital, and so you should want to know, but also investors will want to know what you will do with that money and why that money will continue to add value to the business, and we'll get you to that next fundraise. And then in terms of kickstarting the process, so once you're clear on your idea and your USP and how much you need and what you're going to do with the money and how it's going to get you to the next step, then I mean you need a deck. So much as I hate to admit that, uh, decks, yeah, you need a good deck that makes all of the points that I just mentioned clear, plus some others. So, how will you make money? Um, who is your team? That's that kind of stuff. And depending on your stage, the decks will look slightly different. The amount of detail you go into will be different. But I suppose again, we were part of the Oxford Foundry. So what was fantastic about that is we did like a 6-month intensive program where they walked us through the idea and some of the nuts and bolts of being in a startup, and then to put good practices in place from the beginning. But then they also helped with our first deck creation, and then yeah, and we did a demo day. So I suppose that was for our pre-seed round. So it was a really warm and
wow.
nurturing environment to kind of like step into fundraising. When we started raising for our second round a couple years later, it was not the same kind of climate. And we were no longer in an accelerator program. So that was different. And also with every subsequent raise, you need to, when you start out in the beginning, you haven't achieved any, or you might have achieved something, but it's usually if you've self-funded or it's, quite early. So, you haven't maybe done as much as you would have liked. You have plans. Well, then
Mm,
once you have some money, you should have acted on those plans and figured out what worked and what didn't, and continue to optimize. And so you need to be able
mm,
to show that. So we set to work creating a deck again. Um, it's a painstaking process. And again, when you're so entrenched in your startup or in your business, things that might seem obvious to you might not read in a presentation. So our
mm.
deck, because we're a sexual health startup, was very much about sexual health, which not everybody was super keen on on reading. Um, so yeah, so we created a deck, and I suppose we sent it out to investors. And I can kind of talk through how we selected investors and why we selected the investors we did, but we sent out our deck and then we started getting feedback on it. So we got some feedback from, friends, family, like close investors, before we sent it out. But then, we realized that when we were sending it out to investors, people just thought we were another testing company. And we were like, okay, so the narrative that we're trying to get across in our story and actually our vision maybe isn't as clear as we thought. So
Mhm.
we went back to the drawing board and we did a second round of revisions to the deck, which came across much more clearly, and actually, led to more successful meetings. So I guess the whole point of that is to say, don't be like, start with your deck, like get some good feedback, get it out there. But if you notice that you're getting consistent feedback on it or your points aren't getting across, don't be afraid to go back and rework it. You should.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, Danae, like the deck feels like the never-ending thing
Oh,
that all founders are forever working on. So that's a really good point.
literally forever. Like literally forever. But I mean, and sometimes you've looked at it so much for so long that it all starts to blend. Like you lose. I felt like I lost perspective entirely. So I actually need to step away for it for a little while and then go over it with fresh eyes and a fresh perspective with somebody who had never seen it before, who could get
Yeah.
and kind of like, but always in your meetings with investors, take notes, see what came across clearly, see what didn't come across clearly, based on their questions. They'll give you some feedback and make sure that that you implement it. I mean, everybody's going to give you slightly different feedback, but if you notice consistent themes, really take that in and don't be afraid to adjust.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one of the things that I've noticed is that when investors are kind of asking a question regularly, that
Mhm.
sometimes that can warrant adding a slide
Yep.
about that particular question. Like I've had questions about like, oh, how will you mitigate risk in this area? Had it
Mhm.
like 4 or 5 times. I was like, okay, maybe I should just have a slide to answer that question before they ask it. Um, that can be helpful too.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think, yeah. I mean, the key is to keep, depending on your stage, ideally you want some brevity in your deck, right? You don't want to give them all the information all the time. The deck is to get you a meeting. But I 100% agree. If there's something that's not clear and not coming through, then including that slide in your deck, if it's kind of a core question and quite important, it might make the difference between you getting or not getting the meeting. Because
Yeah,
it's answered a tick box or it's answered a question or like ticked a box that they weren't sure it was worth a meeting to figure out. So
yeah,
clarity and brevity as much as you can. And I suppose the second thing when it comes to fundraising is like if you have once you're confident in your deck, and you're clear on, your business, your USP, how much you want to rate, all the stuff we kind of already covered, then I suppose making sure that you're going after the right investors. So if you've
yeah.
identified how much you want to raise, and so you know your stage, you know how much you want to raise, you know what you're going to do with that type of fund with the funding, then and how long of a runway it'll give you, then you can approach investors that are, like I said, the right stage, the right sector,
Mhm.
check size. There's no point in blanketing people cold. You want to try and take a targeted approach. It is a numbers game to a certain extent, but you
Mhm.
you want to be selective with who you're reaching out to. There's no point in sending somebody who only invests in insurance companies, something having to do with, I don't know, sneakers. Um, so yeah, so being selected in that sense. And then also if you have investors already or you have warm introductions, then that's a great place to start. So go through your LinkedIn, see who knows who, and see if you can get a warm intro or an early friendly conversation.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference when you're getting an introduction that comes from like a trusted source. That can definitely help with getting those initial calls. But you mentioned something really, important there, which is there are these early decisions that you have to make. What type of investors do you approach? What are the things that you should look out for? Um, so how did you and your team go about making that decision as who would you approach and how much you wanted to raise?
So in terms of how much we wanted to raise, we looked at the business, kind of how we were operating, what we wanted to achieve, like what our next milestones were going to be, in order to kind of like continue to grow and develop and act on some of the learnings that we had kind of garnered over the last 18 months, 2 years of operating. And then we decided how much that would cost. So we kind of did like a work backwards calculation. Who do we need to hire? Like, what are the skill sets that are missing? You know, if we had more funding, would be able to do this better or faster. And so once we that's kind of how we determined how much we thought we needed to raise. You don't
Mm,
want to raise more than you need, but you don't want to raise too little so that you are uncomfortable and at risk of running out of money before you achieve anything.
yeah.
So it's striking that balance, and ultimately, that's for those who run their business, they will be best placed to understand like where their largest costs sit and what are the one or two things that you feel you need to achieve with this funding? How long is that going to take, and how much money do you need to get there?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'm sorry, Jade, you had said, I think that was only one part of your question.
No, that's okay. The first one was how did you decide on how much you would raise? And then it's also what types of investors did you approach and why?
So because we were beyond the pre-seed, teetering around seed stage, but probably still a little bit early. So looked for investors who often come in at that stage. Also at an appropriate check size for the amount that we were looking to raise. We
Mhm.
looked at investors who had invested in health tech, sex tech, fem tech, basically things that were related to, there were verticals within our sector. And we also looked for investors who had invested in, I don't want to say similar companies because obviously then it would be a direct competitor. So if they backed a
Mm,
competitor, then they're not going to back you. So that's just save yourself some time. But for those who had invested in similar types of companies or
right.
complementary types of companies, who may have a natural interest or understanding of a particular market or sector that would be of value. So investors are great, especially in the early stages. I mean, some of them just want to provide a check and they're happy to like let you do your thing. Others are willing to be a bit more involved. And so we selected investors who we think could not only add monetary value, but also could add some experience and the value of that to what it is that we were building.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of value to going after investors and speaking to investors that want to be involved, like to a degree, so they can introduce you to their network. They can, help you get into the rooms that otherwise you may not have been able to get into. So I do think that's something that founders should consider. It's not just the money, but also what else will that investor bring to the table?
100%. I think a lot of times when founders are raising, they just want to raise. So the power dynamic is such that, you think the investor holds all the power and you are
Mm,
trying to get them to say yes. But what I would say is that like finding the right investor is so important because this is someone who's going to sit on your cap table, somebody you will be sending reports to, somebody you will need to, work with over the coming years. So founder investor fit, I think actually is really important and doesn't always get enough attention because people are just, they just want to get cash in the bank. They want to get to the next step. They want to survive. Um,
mm,
but founders should be selective about the investors they take on because a mismatch will just lead to you spending a lot of energy managing their expectations,
yeah,
which won't be aligned. And so then instead of putting energy and focus on building your business, you're managing relationships externally, which could be a drain.
yeah.
So I think on for both for the investor and for the founder, I think it's important to have a good fit.
No, 100%. And you're right, founder investor fit isn't something that people talk about enough. It would be great to hear, what are some of the things that you look out for in investors and their personalities, not just what their credentials were in terms of saying, okay, this person is or isn't a good fit for us as a team.
Oh, that's interesting. So I mean, generally, you want an investor who understands kind of like your overarching mission and vision, right? Like you want them to believe. So for Yoxly, it's, we want to simplify, normalize, and destigmatize sexual health. And so somebody who maybe doesn't care at all about health and wellness or sexual health might not be our vibe. They might. So I mean, admittedly, they might not even open our decks. So yeah. So I think having them understand and appreciate the bigger mission and vision, I think is really important. Because it's also gonna affect like, how engaged and supportive they are. Not just in this round, but in future rounds. I
Mm,
suppose in terms of personality, so love an honest investor. I think a lot of times there are, you know, trying to think of the best way to say this. So I think you want people who are going to be candid with you. Um,
yes.
and if they think, you're doing something great, they're going to tell you. Or if they think actually you're making, there's the potential for it to be a costly mistake, you want them to tell.
Mm,
Or if you're like, actually, this slide in your deck is shit, you should change it. Um, or actually these numbers aren't very compelling. Like you want them to give you honest feedback.
yeah.
And ultimately, like you will be running your business. It's an important, the decisions lie with you, but like you want people who have some experience in that area and who can then apply
Mhm.
learned, or who can share what they've learned with you so that you can apply it. That's always really helpful. So investors who are happy to, like you said, make those introductions or, share about experiences they've had in other companies they've invested in or other sectors that might be complementary, potential partnerships. Like you want somebody who's looking to kind of share their knowledge and experience and plug you in if and when it's appropriate. So
Yeah.
I guess that willingness to engage for us was something that we looked for and we were always really excited by and very pleasantly surprised by.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like investor relationships are very similar to co-founder relationships. They're a bit like a marriage.
For,
You want the right people who are in it for the long run. Um,
for sure.
and sometimes it's hard to find the right fit, but it's worth investing that time and energy into that part of the process.
And being honest about it. Sometimes checks will come and you're like, actually, this isn't a very good fit. Like,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? And like it's so yeah, it's important to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Like throughout that process as well. And if things don't feel quite right or you're worried about how the relationship might evolve from the beginning,
Mm.
then it's something that should give you cause for pause. Because
Yeah.
it is a marriage, and if it's feeling strained from the beginning, then it's probably not going to get much easier.
I completely agree. And I think that's, yeah, something that founders should definitely consider. Like you said, the power dynamic it can feel like, oh, I feel that I have to say yes because it's money. And if I say no, how long will it be until somebody else comes along that's interested enough to invest? But sometimes saying no can save you a world of headache further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and I know the markets have been rough for the
Yeah.
last couple years. The markets were not what they were. And so having a really pragmatic fundraising strategy and also thinking about sustainable milestones, like how is that path to profitability is more important than ever. And so really being able to outline for investors, particularly in the current climate, like your path to profitability, I think is you should always have that in your mind. But I think the climate of fundraising has also changed. And so for people to be aware of that.
No, no, that's so true. Um, and saying that, fundraising, it's a difficult process. There are lots of people that go into it, very few that come out the other end with, money in the bank. So it would be good to know what challenges did you face as you raised, and how did you and your team try to overcome them as you're going through the process?
So I've mentioned one, which was the deck feedback. So it was very clear, that maybe we weren't getting our ultimate vision across, because we were focusing on too much of what we kind of done to date, but actually not spending enough time saying, but this is what we plan to do with the money that you're going to give us now. So,
Hmm.
so that was a learning point. So yeah, I think so we went back, we kind of collated the feedback that we were consistently getting and kind of went away. I could have probably done that sooner, to be fair.
Mm.
But yeah, and then we went away and we kind of like updated the deck, which was helpful. And then we also listened to the other feedback that we were getting. So it wasn't just that things weren't clear in the deck, but maybe there were things that investors wanted to see. The
Hmm.
climate is really difficult in this market. Have you thought about B2B plays? Like, do you have this community? Is the community monetizable?
Hmm.
So if you should always listen to the questions that they ask and write them down, because more often than not, there will be repetition. Lots of investors will want to know the same types of things.
Yeah.
Um, but but also so you should be able to, like, even if the first time you hear that question you're surprised, that you should try and preempt and think about what it is they're going to ask you, um, even if it catches you off guard the first time, it shouldn't the second. But I suppose addressing some of those concerns that you hear being raised, so with Yoxly, we started entirely B2C. B2C markets are hard. Have you thought about a B2B play? Well, yeah, we
Mhm.
have. Do you have a pilot? Do you have a letter of intent? So being able to mitigate, even if you don't have the ability to completely, I guess, completely resolve that concern, if there's any kind of evidence you have or any steps you can take to mitigate it, or to
Yeah.
show a plan to deal with it, I think that's also quite helpful in terms of your strategy. And then I suppose, trying to think if there was anything else. Always ask investors what, every meeting that you take, ask them what it is that got them excited. If they've taken the meeting, there's a reason. So ask them, why did they take the meeting? What is it that excited them about your business? Normally they'll tell you, but it's always good to clarify. And then importantly, what didn't they like?
Hmm.
What are the concerns that they have that maybe they didn't voice?
Hmm.
Um, and they'll tell you. And so it's really important that you take in that feedback. I think a lot of times people are afraid to ask, but it's important to take in that feedback, because it just helps you prepare for your next call.
Yeah. And I mean, it's information, right? So it's just helping you to feel more prepared for when somebody else asks that question or raises that concern.
Exactly.
And that makes a huge, huge difference and makes the conversation smoother. And I feel that when you can like preemptively answer a concern, that tends to impress investors because they're, oh, I was going to ask you that, but you've answered it already, or there's a slide on that in your deck, so no worries.
Yeah, it shows that you're forward thinking. It shows that you're forward thinking and that you're thinking you've got your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for sure. Um, Trying to think if there's something else, but I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. If it's important, it will come back to you. That's what I always say. But if it comes back, let me know. We will circle back to that question. Uh, what again? Another thing that founders do tend to struggle with is your fundraising, your knees deep in speaking to investors and networking, and then you still have a business to run. You still have targets to hit or people to look after, or advisors to head up with. So, how have you balanced fundraising with running Yoxley as a business?
It was hard. I mean, it was really hard. So very lucky that I have a co-founder, and we have a team who's fantastic. And so fundraising is a full-time job. Um, and I was very fortunate in that I had people I could kind of trust to keep things running and I could check in with regularly. But it afforded me the time to focus on investor outreach and, meetings and follow up and, improving. Um, so, and this is, I think, why being targeted. So you learn with every investor call, or at least, you should be learning with every call that you take. There's always an opportunity to learn something. And so, but this is why being quite targeted and specific and organized in your approach is important because founders don't have a lot of time. They are pulled in a million different directions. They're still trying to run their business while raising capital, which, like we said, is a full-time job. So you want to be as efficient in that process as possible. So you want to focus on investors who are appropriate for your business, for your size, for your stage, for your sector. You want to, have a deck that is reflective of what it is that you're building. So you want to have confidence
Mhm.
reels. I would assemble your data room in advance. So make sure you have not just your deck, but you have some of the supplementary documentation that people will
Mm,
because that takes time to compile. And
yeah.
so, yeah, so making sure that you are putting these things to the side and getting them ready, so that when investors do express interest or they do want to see something, you have that information to hand. Um, Again, it's just trying to maximize your time. And so if you're taking calls from or you're focusing on investors who aren't ultimately going to be the right fit, then it's great maybe a bit for some learning, but it's you know ultimately probably not where you want to be.
Yeah, and time is everything. It's the one thing that you can't get back.
Yeah,
As a team, you can always go and make more money, but nobody can get their time back. So it is really important to protect your time as a founder.
yeah, it
Um,
is 100% your most valuable resource.
yeah,
100% is your time. So guard it carefully.
yeah, especially when fundraising. But that being said, I mentioned earlier your team, they've built an audience. You have over 1 million followers on your combined social channels. You've got thousands of people on your wait list, and you managed to do that ahead of raising. So how did that traction help with those conversations with investors, especially in a climate where it's like you said, the path to profitability, thinking about traction, thinking about building an audience?
So it certainly impressed them because we gained that audience rapidly. Like we gained it over a few months, and it was further validation or another proof point that what we were doing was resonating. So like this is a group of people who wants what we're putting, who's picking up what we're putting down, basically. And so it's a confidence signal to investors that clearly you're onto something here. The pushback from investors was, okay, it's great you got this community. Now, how do you monetize them? So it's always something else.
Mm,
But what's great about the community that we built is that they can speak into, or they do speak into, our product and service development from the start. So there are a lot of unique insights. So it's not only just like a source of, I guess, organic, forgive me, Jade. It's not only a source of organic marketing kind of at scale, but it's also there's incredible insight and feedback that we can get from these, from people who already have a specific interest in what it is that we're talking about and
yeah.
who can help to guide our product and service development from the start. And that is also a vote of confidence, I think, for investors, because a lot of people build a product and then they go and see if they can find somebody who wants it. Whereas when
Yeah.
you have a group of people who want something and they're telling you what they want, then you can go away and give it to them.
No, that's a huge win because customer centricity is everything. The
Oh, it is.
best products that have, the fastest adoption are the ones where they genuinely solve that problem that people, it's like getting rid of the itch that people have been trying to scratch for a very long time. And so if you have that community, that's such a amazing asset to have, and to be able to lean into. So I can imagine that investors saying, "Oh, how can you monetize it?" That's almost the next step. The first step is actually getting that community to begin with. So that must have been a nice vote of confidence walking into those rooms, being able to say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, it shows that there are people like what it is that you're doing is resonating with a lot of people. And the fact that they feel confident in sharing some of their struggles, like the insight that you gain from that type of interaction is invaluable. It really, really is. So, so grateful to the community. And we listen to them very, very closely. Because again, me as a clinician, I think I know what people need medically, but actually, the way in which we present it or the way in those services are utilized, there may be a disconnect there. But for the person who ends up the end user who's going to be using the services and the people who are putting them out. So the closer you can stay to your community and your users, I think the better.
That's great advice, and especially for people that are either very early days in their building or thinking about, jumping headfirst into starting their own business. If you can start by working on a community as well as the product, that will always serve you to do both hand in hand.
Yeah, 100%.
But our last question. So, if you could go back and do it all over again, um, what would you do differently?
Ah, what a good question. I guess I learned a lot throughout the process. So I suppose like the process itself, like there are probably ways I could have made it more efficient. But that being said, there was lots of learning along the way, which I think is invaluable and definitely something I will apply next time. I mentioned this already, but I think I probably would have gone back. So I think I waited about 3 months. So I've taken 3 months of calls before I was like, the deck really does need to change. I can answer these questions, but actually I found that what we were trying to communicate in the deck wasn't always getting across. And so I probably could have updated our deck sooner because, I mean, apart from like a warm intro, the deck is really the first inkling of your business. It's the first introduction. So the purpose of the deck is to get you the meeting and get you into the room. And if there's something that's missing from it or something that isn't coming across, and or even if people are taking the call and thinking about you as one type of company and actually like they get in there and like, oh, you're a different type of company. It's just, again, it's just not a good use of anybody's time. So I, you can usually tell after the first, few meetings if there's consistent feedback, take that in and then apply those changes to your, to the deck that you're sending out.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Great advice. And also the deck is the one thing. It's like the one document that kind of runs throughout the entire process.
Oh yeah.
That and your financial model.
Oh
So
yeah.
those two things
Key.
go
Key.
key.
Yeah,
Go hand
absolutely.
in hand. But no, thank you, Danae. I mean, is there anything else that you would share with somebody that's first time founder, at the beginning of the fundraising process? Anything else you think that they should know?
So I think we covered the main ones, which I think is, be clear about your idea, what makes you unique, how much money you want to raise. Is that how much you actually need? Like, what do you want to achieve with it? And then making sure your deck reflects all of those things and staying focused on the types of investors you pursue. I think those are quite important. The other thing I would say is don't give up. You're going to have good meetings and you're going to have bad meetings. And there are going to be times when maybe you don't answer questions, you feel you could have done better. But it's a learning process and you can always leave a call having learned something new. So just keep going. And as long as you can apply what you've learned, in the previous meeting to your next one, then it's not a waste of time.
No, that's great advice. And also something that people can carry all the way through from beginning to end. There'll be good calls, there'll be bad ones, but the lessons that you learn in between are so important.
They are. And in your ability to apply them moving forward is important.
100%. Well, that is my official final question. I know I said the last one was, but that that was great. Thank you so much, Danae. I feel like from somebody that's still knees deep in the process right now, and still fundraising, if I had known half of the things that you had just told us over the past hour at the very beginning, it would have been a much easier process. So I appreciate you sharing all of like your knowledge that you've gained along the way. So thank you so much.
Of
And
course.
also, sorry, didn't I go again?
Oh, no. I was just like, yeah, of course. It was a total delight. And like, we continue to learn things as we go through our fundraising journey. So nobody ever has all the answers. It's just how confident, how comfortable you feel with the process. But it does get easier. And I just remembered what I wanted to say before, Jade. I don't know if you want me to say it.
Oh yeah, amazing. Go ahead.
So some founders have asked me when they are going, for those who have maybe some early IP or they've got some processes that, information that's a bit proprietary, they ask like, how do you handle these early stage investor calls when they ask you for really like, I guess, sensitive company information? And it can be a challenge because I think, you're going in there open eyes, open heart. You want to tell them all about your business and get them to fall in love with it, the idea, the whole thing. And so it's hard to be open and honest and vulnerable in that way and also be a bit, I guess, I don't want to say cautious, but some founders don't feel comfortable answering some of the questions, or they
Yeah,
don't know if they should. And I just want to tell founders that it's okay. Any investor who is speaking to you for the right reasons will be absolutely fine if you tell them, you know what, that's a really great question. We do have an answer for it, but I'd like to kind of hang on to that information until our conversations progress to a certain stage.
yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Um, but that's a common question I get from people who are fundraising are like, how much do I divulge about my business? I mean, the financial is fine, but like for those who have IP and processes and sensitive information they want to protect. And it's absolutely okay to tell an investor, you know what, I'm really happy to share that information, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, why don't we see how far these conversations get first?
Yeah, that's no, I'm really glad that you remembered that. That's such a good point. And it
Really?
can
I
be
was like, okay, I feel bad. I was like, I was like, I hope I don't sound too like suspicioso. Like I hope, you know, like
No,
it's not to
I
make
mean,
people feel anxious or uncomfortable in any way, but I know it is something a lot of founders mention they feel they don't know how much they could or should be saying. And so I just wanted to give them a little bit of reassurance and say, again, any investor who's speaking to you for the right reasons will completely understand, and that won't be a problem if you tell them you're happy to have that conversation at a later date.
yeah, I completely agree. I think people that have spoken to investors before, have kind of read around, will know that NDAs don't usually swing around in the fundraising space, but being able to feeling comfortable and confident with pushing back and saying, actually, I'll share more as the conversation progresses. That's perfectly reasonable. Um, and it shows that you're prepared to protect your business. That shows that you're a smart founder. Um, so, like you said, the right investors won't have a problem with that.
Exactly. The ones who are in serious conversations, then and
Mm,
seriously considering it, they won't have a problem at all. For those maybe who are less serious, then you know you probably didn't want them in the first place.
yeah, exactly. And there is such thing as, like we said earlier, bad fit.
Yeah,
Um, those that may have a problem with it, just they may not be the right people, and that's totally fine. It's better that you find that out sooner rather than later.
exactly. Exactly, Jade.
But no, but again, thank you so much, Danae. I really appreciate all of the time that you've given us today. Um, and all of the thought that you've put into your answers. Like I said, had I known more of this at the beginning, I feel like it would have been a smoother ride. So I hope that everybody that's listening genuinely has gained, as much from this as I have. So thank you again.
Oh, you are so very welcome. I am confident that you will do well. And and I also just want to close by saying all of the investors we have at Yoxly are really lovely. So I don't want anybody to think that it's our investors who we have who are, because actually we have been super, super lucky with the investors that we've gotten on board. And they're a fantastic part of our team, and we are very, very grateful to them. Um, and they've been there, they've kind of seen us grow, and we're there to provide support financially and in terms of advice. And so shout out to our investors. And yeah, to all the founders who are going to make it. You're going to make it.
Yeah,
I'm confident.
thank you. Also, I mean, a huge shout out to the rest of the Yoxley team because I know they work incredibly hard
Oh,
and they put a lot of effort into to support whilst you're fundraising as well.
I wouldn't be
Um,
able to do it without them. Without what they've achieved and without them helping to continue to run the business while I focused on the fundraise,
yeah,
yeah, I credit them entirely. Because even though fundraising, it's usually, CEO's job or, the founder's job to go out and do it, it is absolutely a team effort.
yeah, yeah, no, 100%. And you and your team have done an incredible job. So thank you for sharing all of that insight. And for anyone who's listening, we will drop Denies like social links and Yox's social links into the post so that you can follow them as well, follow their journey as they continue to grow too. A huge thank you for those that are listening. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to, share with other founders that could benefit from hearing this conversation. And if you know of anyone that you think would be great for us to interview, so a founder that has closed a round recently, like in the past year or so, then just feel free to message us because we're always looking for great people to speak to. But again, thank you, Danae. Thank you to everyone who's listening, and see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Jade. Bye, guys.